When we look at the causes of stress in our lives, we see that one of the main factors in causing that stress is resistance to change. Think how much energy we collectively waste resisting the inevitable. Yoga teaches us that if we can let go of that resistance to change, we can lead a life that feels far more balanced and far more peaceful. I'm Darren, a yoga teacher and yoga therapist, helping to lead people back to balance in the midst of their modern day lives. It's fair to say that resistance comes up in our lives in so many forms. But in particular, have we considered the resistance that comes up as a result of changes that take place in our lives? For various reasons, human beings are very, very good at trying to stop the inevitable flow of change from happening, even if they have no chance of controlling that change whatsoever. That is to say that if we look into our daily lives, we will see that everything is in permanent states of flux. Our bodies are constantly changing. From the moment we're born, we're getting older. Each and every day we find ourselves with different levels of energy. We find ourselves with different patterns of emotions. And each and every day we may notice as we get older that different health issues come up, that health can come and go in so many different ways. We look around us and we can see that we are susceptible to losing our loved ones, and actually that everything that we try to control, to whatever degree, is subject to change. The careers that we spend so much time working for and putting energy into, jobs can come and go. One moment we have the best job in the world or something that we're really happy with and we can get made redundant. We can also see the incursion of change into our home lives. For example, if we have children, we may notice that no sooner have we found a routine that works for the whole of the family, then suddenly our children grow up a little bit, their behaviours change, their capacities change, and then all of the routines need to change once again. Also, if we look out into the planets, we will see, of course, that the planetary system is also constantly in flux. The universe is perhaps growing, new stars are being born, stars are dying. Our own star, the sun, inevitably at some point will breathe its last gasp and will then plunge this solar system into darkness when it dies. And yet for some reason, we are in resistance to that change. Why do we resist things that are inevitable? Well, one of the reasons that we might like to consider as to why we are so resistant to change is the fact that we like to try as humans to create what we might call islands of security for ourselves. The unfathomable vastness of the world and the unfathomable discomfort that maybe arises from knowing at a deep level that everything is subject to change triggers a behaviour pattern in human beings to try and solidify the things that we think that we have control over. That is to say, for example, if we buy ourselves a house, or we have a family, or we establish ourselves in a certain type of career, or we have children, these things give a superficial impression of permanence. And as a result of that, we cling on to that permanence because when we have those things, for example, when we have financial security, or when we have peace and harmony in our family, or when we have a home to go back to each night, it gives us a feeling of comfort and security. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is that that belies a incongruence, we might say, with the reality of things as they are. And as we've just talked about, the reality of things as they are is that things change. But because we place so much currency in keeping things the same in order to protect our limited sense of comfort, it means that when things start to change, we feel very, very uncomfortable about those changes. We don't want to lose our resources. We don't want to lose our health. We don't want to lose our homes. We don't want to lose our jobs. And whilst there is nothing wrong with not wanting to lose those things, because we are in resistance to those things, we don't accept them as a reality. And that's because this kind of reality can be quite hard to cope with and quite hard to bear. We could say that we falsely believe that comfort can be found in keeping things the same. But the reality is that because those things by their nature are subject to change, inevitably they do. And because we place so much currency in keeping things the same, and we find pleasure and comfort in maintaining that status quo, when they inevitably change as they do, we become discomforted, and as a result of that, that causes us to suffer. At some point, we have to face the reality of the things that we've put so much effort into in order to create security for ourselves crumbling, and when they do, that inevitably brings suffering to our lives. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, he clearly talks about what is called parinama, and parinama is the Sanskrit word for change. And he says very, very clearly that because of our inability to accede to the reality of parinama, which is change in all things, this causes us to experience dukkha, which is the Sanskrit word used in the Yoga Sutras for suffering. The Yoga Sutras explain that essentially when we look at the principles of what are called purusha, which is the awareness within us, and prakriti, which is defined as nature, which includes the mind, includes the body, includes everything going on around us, we can see something quite valuable and important. One of the qualities of purusha, or this awareness or consciousness within us, is that it never changes, it is unchanging. And one of the key qualities of prakriti, or nature, is the fact that it is constantly subject to change. Patanjali counsels us that if we want to find lasting and secure peace and reduce suffering in our lives, the practice is to identify ourselves more and more with that which does not change, i.e. our consciousness or our inner awareness, and to gently use the practice of vairagya, which means to detach from our over-attachment and our expectations of a world that is literally always in flux and always changing. By shifting our anchor into a space that is unchanging, we actually give ourselves a ground to stand on where we can at the deepest level feel held and feel secure. At the same time, by stepping away from over-attachment into the world of things that are always changing, we are able to face up to the reality of that change, and therefore when things do actually change in our lives, we are able to flow with them with more grace and therefore with less suffering. One thing that we notice about this resistance to change is that it layers itself into our bodies at a very, very visceral level, in a very, very visceral way. That is to say that when we're resisting things in our lives, when we're resisting change, that resistance becomes a felt experience, a bhava within the body. So we may actually feel a contraction in the body, we may feel tension, we may feel the manifestation of stress in different ways within our body, causing our body not to feel pleasant and causing our body not to feel balanced. Therefore, Patanjali advises us that it's far better to see if we can accept the underlying realities of nature in the sense that it is constantly subject to change, and see if we can flow with change more gracefully. See if we can let go of tension in the body through various practices such as long exhalations and using asana or movement in an appropriate way, but also at the psychological level, trying to let go and dissolve the patterns that cause us to grip onto things when we know ultimately they are going to change. And this is what I often say about yoga, is that it's nothing less than a very, very radical reckoning with truth. We understand the nature of change at such a deep level that we just become accepting of it, and we roll with it, and we flow with it. And whilst we still value and appreciate the things in our lives, even if they are subject to change, we have a deep felt experience of the fact that these things do change, and therefore when they change, our practice is just to try to let go of them with grace, essentially receiving every moment with gratitude, but at the same time letting go of everything that ultimately we don't own or control in a graceful way. Therefore, as a starting point, it can be a really, really valuable experience to begin noticing the things that you're currently resisting in your life in relation to change. What kind of things are going on in your life at the moment that are related to change that you're resisting? Perhaps take a moment to reflect on those things or to write them down. And one of the first things we can do as we become aware of those items or those things is ask ourselves the question, what would happen if I stepped back from an algorithmic resistance to these things that are changing? What would happen if I practiced accepting these changes? What would happen if I practiced working with these changes and allowing myself to flow more gracefully with the changes in my life? How would I feel? And therefore, what would my experience of life be if I was able to let go of those resistances? With practice, what we may find is that this can completely change our perspective on life. We then are able to see life for what it is, as a constantly evolving and changing set of circumstances. But we come at it from a deeper understanding. We come at it from a calmer place. We come at it from a place of deep knowledge and deep acceptance of that change. And whilst this doesn't mean that we're going to flow through life without any resistance at all, it can help to bring much more balance to the way that we move through our lives, to the way that we receive those changes, and therefore the way that we feel internally. As always, thanks for joining me. Please do like, comment, or subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.